I'm Helen.
And I'm Veronica.
When deciding on how to substitute a Miss Babs yarn for another yarn your pattern calls for, we are going to suggest that you ask a few questions. We'll cover those in this tip. My first piece of advice is this: do a bit of research. Familiarizing yourself with the yarns we offer, their fiber content, and their characteristics will help you make a good decision. We've created a yarn comparison chart that will help you learn more about our yarns. We hope you find it helpful.
So when you want to substitute a yarn, consider starting with these questions. First, what gauge are you trying to achieve? Will the yarn you want switch in easily? Since many patterns use a looser or tighter gauge than is recommended for the yarn they call for, it's helpful to look up the yarn weight category on Ravelry or elsewhere on the internet and use that category and the gauge suggested on the label to figure out which yarns will work best.
The next thing to think about is how you want your yarn to perform. How durable is the yarn? Will it give you good stitch definition? Think about the drape. Something like Sojourn, which is cashmere and silk, is very drapey, and it'll have a bit of a halo from that cashmere, so it will behave differently than our Yummy 2-ply, which has more normal wool characteristics like the bounce, the stitch definition, but less drape. You'll also want to consider stretch, warmth, the weight of the yarn, the texture. Woodberry is a very crisp yarn with great stitch definition, but I would not substitute it for Sojourn because a pattern that uses Sojourn would be looking for the drape and the softness of the Sojourn. You'll also want to think about color and how that will interact with your pattern. We have many fingering weight yarns and they all behave a bit differently, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend substituting willy-nilly. Another thing to think about is fiber content. Wool has memory and bounce, cotton is sturdy and heavy, and alpaca is slinky and drapey. So if the fiber content is different, you have to think about if the yarn you are thinking about substituting will behave in the same way as the original yarn. If not, how will that change the finished look of the project, and will you still like the new look? If you are substituting a sturdy, bouncy wool, like Cahuilla, for a more drapey yarn, like Yowza, the character of the fabric will change, even though the weight and fiber content are the same.
Finally, you want to ask yourself, is there an appropriate other yarn? And sometimes the answer is no, and we can't really recommend a good substitution.
From our line.
From our line, yes. For example, Helen loves to knit colorwork sweaters, and they're knit in a traditional non-superwash wool. While we may have a yarn that matches that gauge perfectly, it's going to make your project look a little different. So here's Helen's colorworks in a traditional yarn and in our Yummy 2-ply. And for some substitutions, like for a linen or a cotton, we just don't have anything appropriate. So try to remember that substituting yarn is rarely a simple one-to-one substitution and does involve a number of factors that will determine the outcome of your finished project. Once you know what yarn you want to use for your project, you'll also need to calculate how many skeins you'll need.
We have a worksheet for you to help with that in the next tip.